Yes. Looks great.
Okay. I guess I could just leave that up.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and admit everyone now. Hello, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. People a chance to log in. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this IPS Policy Forum talk with Allison Clark, Algorithms of Deception, a Case for Nuanced Election Data. I would like to especially thank Dr. Clark for being here today, and I would also like to thank the Carnegie Mellon chapter of the Alexander Hamilton Society for co-sponsoring today's event. Before we get started, I'd like to give some house rules for today's event. Please remain muted throughout the presentation. And for the Q&A section, please use the raise hand function if you would like to ask your question yourself, or you can send me a private message in the chat if you prefer that I ask your question on your behalf. And now, to introduce Dr. Clark, I would like to turn over the mic to Kyle Robertson, a sophomore in IPS and president of the Alexander Hamilton Society. Kyle, welcome.
Great, thank you, Allie. Hi, everybody. My name is Kyle Robertson. I'm a sophomore in the Institute of Politics and Strategy, studying international relations and politics. I'm also the president of the Alexander Hamilton Society, an independent, nonpartisan organization with chapters on more than 80 college campuses nationwide. We aim to promote discussion of American foreign policy and national security issues between students of all backgrounds and disciplines. Our chapter here at CMU is always looking for fresh perspectives and new ideas, and I encourage anyone interested in learning more about the club to fill out the Google form linked in the chat. I'm honored to present today's speaker, Dr. Allison Clark. Dr. Clark is a social scientist and civic engagement professional with over 15 years of digital access advocacy and analysis experience. She has supervised advocacy campaigns in the areas of healthcare, the environment, and voter education registration. Dr. Clark has worked as the Deputy Director of State Voices Florida, where she successfully oversaw the voter registration of over 300,000 people of color. Her most recent endeavor, Turnout, is a new voter engagement program that combines her expertise in the areas of information communications and technology with popular culture as a strategy to teach civic engagement literacy. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Allison Clark.
Hello, thank you, Kyle, and thank you, Allie. I want to thank the Institute for the invitation and the co-sponsorship of the Alexander Hamilton Society. Let's get to it. I have a lot of slides and a little bit of time. I want to start with the premise behind this and how my journey fed into where I am now. So first of all, how I got into the political side of things. This is a picture of my Aunt Ethel. This is in 2012 when then President Barack Obama was running for office. This was Florida. I have this slide here for a reason. This was Florida then. He won the state in 2008 and 2012. Florida is more of a purple state. It ebbs and flows. So your messaging needs to address that. A tale. The woman in the picture with my aunt at the time was running for the US Senate. The candidate that she was running against is now Governor Ron DeSantis. Elections matter. He became senator and then he went on to become governor of the state. My path, I am a Florida girl, born and raised. I worked at the University of Illinois without all the story at the Supercomputing Center where the web browser was born. that trajectory, I completed my PhD at Michigan State in mass media, but looking at how hip hop culture could impact the use of technology at the time. You can see my road is a bit eclectic, which led me, I'll get more into the civic engagement side, to Black and Blue researchers, which is what I created because I saw the need for nuanced data, which is what the genesis of this talk is about. So I was interested in STEM education, but using art to get kids interested in it. And I employed that same technique in civic engagement. This was the first election where I got to experiment with that. Voter education is something that is missing in our society, period. A lot of people, that's not a priority, let's say. Your biggest contribution can be being engaged in your own neighborhood, in your area, the mayoral races. It's important to mobilize voters and use terminology, or if you will, communications that is not offensive, if you will. For instance, in Florida, we have a Black population who is consistent of people of Caribbean heritage, people who are foreign nationals who are citizens. We have African Americans. So even using that type of terminology is important. I'll deep dive a little more into the Latinx to Hispanic continuum. Hispanic is here for a reason. The Florida voting file uses that as the categorization as a race as opposed to an ethnic group. More on that later. So data can tell you what happened, but it can't tell you why it happened. You can look at the spreadsheet and you can see what happened, but it can't give you the deep dive that you need. And so you need that community knowledge aspect to gird that knowledge. What interested me, I've always been a bit of a data geek, if you will, in the political world. I was having a conversation with one of the data guys at a place that I was new at. And I made the comment that I said, you know, Black women would like a little love from the Democrat Party. And he replied, well, the data shows we don't have to. And this was a nonpartisan place, you know, that I was at. And I was new. I think it was like maybe my first week. I can't remember. And this was 2017. Well, and we're really cool right now. We're like this, for the record. But at the time I wanted to slap him, but I didn't have the knowledge to counter him, if you will, with data. After that, Alabama happened, where Doug Jones was elected. And he came in the next day because we had had conversations about the need to penetrate North Florida. North Florida is usually ignored as far as progressive organizing. Northwest Florida, excuse me, the Panhandle. That's where Matt Gaetz is the representative, to give you a frame. So one thing that Black women do, as you can see at the time, now you can see it's obvious, look what happened in Georgia. But at that time, Black women bring people to the polls with them. So you're getting more, if you're looking at a cost per vote, if you will, you're getting more bang for your buck. So a good investment. But that conversation, and a good guy, a good person, like I said, who's open to conversation, showed me that if you don't have that community knowledge, that cultural knowledge, you can miss things in races that can be razor thin. And Florida's known for close races, as you know. So there are many obstacles to the ballot box in 2020. COVID, we're still dealing with. There was misinformation. There was international attempts using social media that were targeting particularly young Black men, that 18 to 39 age group. The CDC at the time was recommending that you should vote by mail. There was counter messaging not to vote by mail. The post office was having issues. Poll workers, people who usually volunteer on the day of elections, are usually elderly volunteers. And they were facing COVID. Efforts to cut back voting hours, which is legislation that's being attempted in Georgia currently. Bills are being introduced. Voter ID. So just being able to arm a voter with the knowledge that they needed of the mechanics of voting, just simply the mechanics of voting in Florida. So when I talk about algorithms really quick, what I'm talking about is the formulas that are used to determine, what the data says. Well, let me not get ahead of myself. What an algorithm does, it's a recipe, right? It tells you what to do, a step-by-step process. But when our biases are interjected, then our analysis with our assumptions and sometimes our caricatures of people, then the algorithms will be off. And once again, in the political world, race is used, but it's self-reporting for voter files. And the reason I have this file here is this is from census.gov of what the categories of race are, which is what the categories are used in voter files. And they are broad. They're not specific, particularly for people of Asian descent. That's a broad range, many languages as well, to try to communicate with that voter block, which is a growing block in the state of Florida and Georgia. Also, Black and African American, as I said before. One of the things that is problematic for the voter file is treating the category of Latino and Hispanic as a race as opposed to an ethnic group. So the race and political data that is used is from the voter file. And as you can see here, some of the assumptions that are made, the Florida race is 75% self-reported, but the models that are used, it's 25%. And so the different race categories is something just to be aware of, because census data is what we use in this country for many things. Redistricting, it's one of them, funding, grant proposals. So just being aware that the limitations of that data. I wanted to give you a snapshot of what a voter file looked like. This is from Clark County in Nevada. But basically, the voter files are public record. And so just like Google, Facebook uses data to determine things and do predictions, so do political data scientists. Some have race in the categories. Florida does, Georgia doesn't. Some have party affiliation. Florida does have party affiliation. It will list your party, but it will not, and the last time you voted, but it does not record how you voted. So with this information and other public databases, surveys, there's sampling, weighing, statistical analysis, boom, you get the products for your different models, how to do turnout and persuasion. 90% of it is science, if you will. 10% of that is that synthetic data, if you will. And once again, 10% may not be a lot, but it's a lot when you have a close race and you have populations that you want to move towards your side, if you will. So that's the basis of it. And I'm going to use a little of what happened in Florida because I live here and I work here. And some of what happened in Georgia as far as messaging. So what happened in Florida the night of the election? Basically, Joe Biden did not win in the state of Florida. Donald J. Trump won the state of Florida. And look at that margin. There was third party, 0.9%. This is important. I wanted to highlight how messaging works and how it worked in this race. Traditionally, Black and African American voters they show up at the polls, let me just say that, as opposed to voting by mail. Trusted voices and influencers were persuading people in our communities to vote by mail. And you see that messaging worked. Whereas there was other messaging to not vote by mail. That messaging worked as well. If you were watching that night and you saw Florida, it all showed down to Miami, where all the activity was going on. So what happened? There was good turnout in Miami-Dade. There was solid Hispanic turnout in Miami-Dade. So it wasn't an issue of turnout, if you will. It was an issue of messaging. This slide demonstrates for the entire state of Florida the swing from the Democratic margins from 2016 to 2020. This map was created by a gentleman named Matthew Isbell. He's on Twitter. If you're interested in this type of thing, follow him on Twitter. This is an interactive map that he's created. And it shows how the margins changed from 2016 to 2020 towards GOP or towards Democrats. And what's interesting to note is how red Miami-Dade, which is a blue county by trade, right? How much it shifted from 2016 to 2020, over 20%. Something else to note is this is Duval County area, North Florida, shifting blue, which Duval is traditionally a red county, if you will. The other thing that's interesting, this is the panhandle that I pointed out earlier. This area, shifting blue, there were organizations working that a lot of that is Black rural areas. Once again, this area has been traditionally ignored by progressive organizations. But once again, note the beet red and also dark red in the Central Florida, Ocoee area, because if you go into that interactive map, you drill down to precinct level and street level. In this area, mostly are Puerto Rican citizens. In South Florida, and don't make the assumption that all Latino people live in South Florida, that is not true. They live throughout the state, and this is a concentration in this area. And here's another, Matthew did the migration of Hispanic voters. So this is the data points as to what happened from 2016 to 2020, what was going on. So we have that data here, that what happened with the shift. So what happened? It was messaging. The polls were off. Sometimes political parties may rely on national messaging. So for instance, as I alluded to earlier, the Latinx, progressives may use the term Latinx, but have you talked to your friends and family and people who may be Latino? Do they want to be called Latinx? If you're calling people, if you're knocking on their doors, particularly now during COVID, there was a lot of digital communication. Not popular. And Hispanic is a term that's used in the voter file. Assumptions may be made about various populations about how they feel about immigration or socialism or abortion. Hot button issues for some people. Do you let that messaging just magnify and not counter it? Right? You make assumptions that people, oh, well, America is not a socialist nation. If that's a fear you have from a country that you fled from, that can impact you. the data of Florida Hispanic voters, a lot of people will register as nonpartisan, not affiliated with a party. So that means that they're not getting that communication, those direct mailers, because they're not on someone's mailing list. And once again, as I said, the polls were off. There was a term that was coined. I don't know if this was coined anywhere else, but in Florida, the shy Trump voter, meaning that when a pollster may have called someone and they were asked who they were going to vote for, they didn't say. I wanted to share this slide because of some of the data that was going on at the time. As I mentioned earlier, Black and African-American men of the demographic 18 to 39, young people in general, let's just back up a bit, right? That age group, it's hard to move, you guys. Give us the secret sauce, please. But this age group in a demographic that votes high was of concern, turned everyone out, let you know the significance. And so why should I vote? Why does it matter to me? Even for any citizen, making it relevant to them. So for this age group, the whole canceling college debt, right? That's a thing for everybody. I had to pay mine, but I don't begrudge you. Yes. An example is why telling them how elections matter, the state attorney's race. In Florida, each county is assigned an attorney, and they're just called state attorneys. In 2016, Mark Ober had been a 16-year incumbent who had a reputation of blocking people up bicycling while Black and brown. 16-year incumbent, Andrew Warren, won by 4,719 votes, making that relevant. And he just won his last race. He was up for election again in Hillsborough County. So pointing out those types of things and making it relevant. I wanted to share a little bit of the art that moved people, if you will. This is some of the social media content that was used in Georgia. I myself wasn't very active in Georgia. We created some content for Georgia just because we are in love with everything that was going on there, and it was an exciting time. And we know people there. But I just wanted to share some of the campaigns that were used. There was a move of influencers where they came into the state, and Instagram, social media, as I said, reaching people where they are, giving the relevance. The one reason that they're, well, as you know, swinging the Senate, but also statistically, a runoff race, people don't show up. That's a race where there's low turnout. So there was a need to generate a lot of energy. Once again, why should I turn out? And a lot of people, young people in this particular race who had just registered to vote did turn out and had high participation. One program that we created to supplement what C3 organizations were doing in the state was a campaign called Turn Up, Turn Out, which we emphasize that voting is Black culture. A model that, that we adapted was created by Nielsen Marketing. And they did a study in 2018 of African-American consumers. It was an 8-year study, and they published it in 2018. And basically, they looked at the nonlinear path to making a purchase. And with my team's marketing background, we looked at this as a marketing, right? You're marketing to people to get them the vote, if you will. Look at the vote as a product, as a purchase. How they make their decision to vote in the first place. We were not telling people who to vote for, but we wanted people to be informed and educated of, once again, the mechanics of voting. The mechanics of voting in this state can be a bit challenging, and what your options were. and the misinformation that was going on. And each county, we have 67 counties. Each county is not exactly the same, as they have a range of laws that they can follow. For instance, when early voting starts, they have a range, a time range, but they don't all have to start on the same date. So conveying messaging that voting is election season, not one day. You have several options that you can choose from. Although vote by mail was being pushed heavily, one concern was the higher rejection rate of vote by mails for people of color. Don't know the reason. This is a study done out of University of Florida. Dr. Charles Smith, I think his first name is Charles, produced these studies 3 years in a row, and it showed how there was a higher rejection rate. So there was a concern that some of these ballots would be rejected. A lot of times people forget to sign them. You do have the option to do something called curing if your supervisor of election can contact you. So once again, it's a process, and we just wanted people to be aware and how to track their ballot, right? Because there was misinformation on that as well. So if you see, we used a campaign of using online traditional radio. Radio is big in the Black and African American community still. The study shows that this population is a high user of apps, and celebrity influencers they do listen to, and also who doesn't like free stuff, right? This is the area that was our designated market areas. Once again, we weren't trying to we were just trying to educate in the areas that are sometimes neglected and with high African-American and Black populations. So the Black Belt, which is an area that has populations in Volusia County, Duval, once again, I said, did go blue, and the I-4 corridor. If you're into politics, you hear about the infamous I-4 corridor, where everyone flocks over to the Tampa area. If you pay attention, that's where candidates concentrate on that area heavily. We created a family called the Turnips, which is a civic engagement minded family where you followed their journey to the polls, and you could learn about the different options of how to vote. Once again, as I said, the mechanics of it. We created an app where early voting locations, accurate information, where drop boxes were located, dates for each of the 67 counties with accurate information for each county, which was important to us, even though the campaign was not running in all of the state, but it was available for people throughout the state. And we did have people, one of our campaigns actually click on this app, one of our partners, that directed them saying that you're near a polling place and you can go vote now. And that was during early voting. And I will skip the song. I just wanted to highlight how I mean, if we have time, we can go back. The campaign had, like I said, you saw the campaign had art. We had some young hip hop artists create that song. We had jingles, we had good swag that we gave away, hoodies, t-shirts. And we also created an influencer box, which I'll thank the millennials on my team, because it's like, okay, why are we doing this? But very popular, where the unboxings, I don't know, I would love to hear if some of you watch unboxings on Instagram, but they're a very big deal. So we had influencers throughout the state do unboxings and say why they were voting. But this slide shows, once again, the areas of the counties that we were operating in to supplement what was already going on. And remember, we had to be highly digital, right? And also rise above the noise, if you will. There was a lot, everyone, you're getting 1,000 texts and and so we wanted the cool factor, if you will, turn up, turn out, vote, do it for the culture. And for the most part, there was an increase from 2016 to 2020. You know, people were motivated to vote. Only a few counties went down a little bit. Once again, this was the turnout rate. I'll just zip through in the Panhandle, Duval, and the I-4 corridor. Now, this is what's currently going on throughout our nation. There are efforts to bring in legislation throughout the country that would restrict voting access. In the state of Florida, where organizations have done voting registration work to get people registered to vote, people who voted by mail, as you can see, people of color voted by mail in record numbers. There is currently in the works a bill to remove the ability, well, let me speak clear on this. When you register to vote, you can ask for your ballot to be mailed for you for the next 2 to 3 cycles. The proposed bill wants to remove all that work that was done. So if you are sitting at home thinking that you're going to get your ballot in the mail for 2022, which is it's the gubernatorial race in Florida, if this bill is passed, you won't get it because they've removed that. That won't be efficient for supervisory elections. They would have to spend money on that. So that's something that may or not pass in the state of Florida. Also, a highlight is the state of Georgia, removing the ability to vote on the Sunday, which traditionally African-American churches do a souls to the polls. And that 22 means there are 22 bills that are trying to be pushed through. And notice also in the state of Arizona. So some long-term strategies as far as you can see, of course, algorithms are biased. Maybe I shouldn't say of course, but if people are creating them, even AI, for example, the database, shows how some of the databases don't have enough faces to read darker faces. So that's the thing, even in the sink, washing your hands with the automatic thing. So having people on your team that are cognizant of that goes a long way. Being able to speak the language of the community that you want to engage, and don't come in a month or 2 before the elections to try to win them over because they know your fate. And once again, the whole cultivating of the relationships. This past election season, if you will, there was heavy usage of software, an app that did relational organizing. Basically, you could pull up the people in your phone and contact them and send them information. You want to know what people's interests and concerns and needs. That's why Stacey Abrams is so successful. She comes into the room and talks about what you're concerned about. The local, as I said, the civic engagement and myth busting sessions, right? Because there is a lot of misinformation out there. People who just aren't engaged need you, people like you, if you're here listening to this, that shows you have an interest in this type of thing. Do some myth busting, each one teach one. And as far as strategies for winning, you do want to register people to vote. And prior to that, you want to educate them so they know why they want to participate in the democratic process. People also need to be taught that it doesn't end at voting, right? If we want to preserve our democracy, you need to be engaged. So register to vote, persuasion techniques that are convincing to them, that bring truth to them, and then increasing the turnout of people. As you can see, margins matter, and the wider the margin, the more comfortable you can sleep at night as you're leading up to the elections. And here's my contact information. I hope you enjoyed it. And Allie, I'll turn it over to you.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Clark. It was super interesting. And I'm glad that you talked about representation in AI development, because I know that's a lot of work being done here at CMU in our AI. So definitely everyone is on board here at CMU. So with that said, I would like to open it up to questions. If any of you have questions, please use the raise hand function to ask them yourselves, or put it in the chat function and I will read it for you. While I give folks a chance to send in their questions. Oh, we have one from a postdoc here in IPS. What are the skills and experiences you think would most benefit students who are interested in pursuing careers like yours? Great question, Dan.
Wow. My background is so eclectic, but what I will say is I advise political science majors to also, if they have a bend towards computer science, if you're good with an Excel spreadsheet, let me just say that, honest to God, an Excel spreadsheet, you are in the room with the data bros. I mean, that's what they use. If you can manipulate an Excel spreadsheet, you're on your way. I would love to see more women in the room, more women of color in the room. Once again, we bring an aspect to the room that others may not know. So yes, augment your skills. That's the one thing. If you want to go the data route, and if you and get on a campaign, volunteer, so you'll know the ropes.
Thank you. Our next question is, how do you explain the gains by Republicans among Black and Hispanic voters in the 2020 presidential election?
Yes, some of the experts in Florida are still trying to figure that out. But as I said, I think the slide that I showed about 2016, the drift, if you will, 2016 to 2020, Joe Biden in some counties lost where Hillary Clinton won. I don't know what to do with that. People are still looking at what happened, but some things, Florida is a conservative state, and there are Black Republicans in Florida. And once again, Hispanic, you cannot assume. So it was white Cubans basically in Florida, in South Florida, that voted for Donald Trump. And then when you're giving a message to someone from Venezuela, and it's socialism, and it's not being countered. So yeah, that's all I got. Look, help me.
Thank you. Over to Mark Camlet.
Very interesting talk. I really enjoyed it. My question is, are there demographic changes either based on relative growth of different groups, age of the population, of things of that sort in Florida, in which you might think are going to influence future elections? And if so, how so?
Yes, I do. Well, I didn't include a slide. The white voters are aging out. Mm-hmm. That's basic. So, and the Hispanic population is growing in the state of Florida. Mm-hmm. So those are two factors. The main thing is, as you saw, the swing from 2016 to 2020, developing relationships. Stacey Abrams was not an overnight sensation, right? She spent years building that coalition. As you said, and Florida is, I'm glad you asked this, a very mobile state. People move around, people are in and out of the state, and there is not the connection between the states to send that voting information between everyone. I think the system is called the ERIC system. I think Florida just joined it. So those are factors, yes. The white voter is aging out. Latinx population, Latino population is growing in the state. And so let me say something else. An example, something that I learned along the way was Puerto Rican voters who left Puerto Rico because of the hurricane. And people were quick to want to register them to vote. Well, a couple of things. On the island, the color for the parties are opposite.
Oh.
So if you don't know that, that's a big thing. So, and also if you see that surname on a ballot, friend of mine. So yeah, those are some factors.
Thank you. It's helpful.
So I'm going to shift now to some questions that were pre-submitted by our master's students. The first one is, how can we improve polling strategies to have better data that actually reflects minorities' voting patterns?
Yes, well, first of all, I hope I showed that if you diversify the room, that helps. But also be willing to admit what you don't know and then listen, and also take it more local. I think that helps inform the campaign, right? There may be things going on if you know, people like to talk about the DC analyst or the New York analyst who's working from another state. But if you don't know what's actually going on in neighborhoods even, I mean, that can make the difference. So I think doing that. And also I have another little story there. There is a data analyst, his name is Terrence Woodbury, and his firm is called HIT Strategies. He is a Black African-American male who started this firm, and he tells when during the elections, he had done some surveys, and some young African-American males have referred to Kamala Harris as a top cop. The room that he was sharing this data with was African Americans, and everyone started laughing because it was known like, that is not language that we use. And so where are they getting that? Well, that was from social media. The ads that were targeting them. She was the first candidate who needed, I don't know if the Democrat Party did or not, but needed to have money spent to counter the negative messaging against her. So that's an example.
Thank you. I'd like to also call out a comment that came through from Doris Cross. She says, teaching civics in the schools is another one, because the children of Latinos are usually the translators for their parents and caretakers.
Absolutely. 100% correct, yes.
Our next question is, are there ways to control for lack of minority participation in polling with these algorithms that would allow for a more accurate reading of voter preference?
Well, I think making an effort to expand the pool of participants. This past year was the first time I was contacted, and I'm sorry about that. That should be unplugged. This is the first time that I was contacted to participate in a poll. So that was new. So expanding your poll of participants, but also weighting. There's weighting that is done, and that weighting was off in Florida, and they're still reevaluating that. So
terrific.
Yeah, and I'm gonna get that. I'm gonna give me a second.
Sure, absolutely. The joys of Zoom, everyone. Thank you for being patient.
Live TV.
Our next question is, do you work with national organizations like Election Protection, wetheaction.org? And then he says, your county by county app is impressive and needed nationwide.
Oh God, yes. I know friends from out of state wanted the swag and me to create apps on the fly. We do work with election protection organizations, and one of those organizations is Common Cause. There in the state, there are a number of organizations who do this, who have hotlines that app directed people to the hotline if they needed assistance, or if anything went on at the at the polls to try to prevent them from voting.
Terrific. And where do you, oh, we read that one already. Sorry, one moment, please. Could you share any of your favorite books on election or election data?
Well, of course, you should read Stacey Abrams' books. I'll recommend those, but actually, no, and I will tell you why. We wanted to use a new approach in this field. It's called GOTV, Get Out the Vote. So I have manuals, on how to get out the vote. I will tell you a good one that you can pull up is Barack Obama's on community organizing. That manual. So it's more manuals that I've been reading. But like for Turn Up, Turn Out, we actually wanted to merge traditional GOTV methods, which when you get those phone calls, when you get those texts, etc., people knocking on your door, leaving literature, but also augmented with, like I said, with a song, with artwork, with the cool factor. So kind of, it's textbooks, really.
Thanks. I'm going to take one more question from the chat and then go to Jonathan Servus, who has his hand raised. So Jonathan, I'll be with you in just one moment. Our next question is, where do you think the Democrats failed or can improve in their outreach to minority voters?
Well, I think that getting out into the fields earlier, sometimes that's contingent on money, right? And it was such a there were so many candidates that getting that money to that candidate, that Joe Biden was finally the candidate of choice, into the state sooner rather than later. And once again, engaging year round, not just at elections, but letting the constituent know that we hear you. Right now, the thing is the minimum wage, right? And so that's going to be a big messaging for Democrats. And that passed in the state of Florida with a 60%, it was an amendment on this last ballot. That was bipartisan in the state of Florida by 60% to increase minimum wage for $15.
Thanks. Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clark. So my research focuses on redistricting and especially racial gerrymandering. And teaching a class this semester, and there are several students here today interested in the topic. And you made some mention about census data and the usage of racial data in voter registration and sort of the biases. And I'm wondering, as you probably well know, enforcement of the Voting Rights Act, as far as redistricting, is critically important that we have accurate data on race in the census. And given that we've had these delays in the US Census data, and there's questions about the accuracy, I wonder if you have any thoughts about particularly the accuracy of Black representation in the census.
Yeah. I'd rather come to your class. Let me say this, I don't have any insight on that, but I will say, the effort to limit the, what they call the hard to count areas, right? The HTCs. That was a battle in the state of Florida. There was little to no funding given to that in our state compared to, and we're not the size of a California, but I think, didn't they get like $44 million? I mean, the governor allocated money to count people, and that was not done in this state. So once again, organizations who had to make citizens aware of what was going on. I think our best hope on that, I heard the data is supposed to come out in September now, I believe, because the new administration is now recalibrating to try to make up for Hispanic data that was not included. Our best bet is to, in the state of Florida, when it's time for redistricting, to have hearings in the community so citizens are aware of how the lines are going to be drawn, because I'm sure you've used our state as a case study for gerrymandering. So yes, I would love to talk to you though. I hope I helped. Oh, okay.
Thanks. I'd like to turn it over to Sylvia Smith, who wants to make a comment.
Hi, I'd just like to say the messaging was so different for African Americans as everyone else. We were encouraged to go and vote in person to make sure that our votes were counted. And then we were also warned that you might end up with harassment at the polls when you got there, and a lot of our older people were almost afraid to vote. A lot of them had been voting through the mail for years because they were older, and then all of a sudden they were told, to do different. How do we keep people from just sending out bad mixed messages and all of that?
Sylvia, thank you for that. I'm curious, what state are you in?
Pennsylvania.
Okay, got it. Yes.
And this messaging came through our churches. I mean, our churches are still the place where we are given information about different things. What we hear on the news, we don't always pay attention to, but over the pulpit is where we get a lot of our information that we trust. Let me just add that we trust.
Yes, yes. Yes, thus the vaccine effort moving to the churches.
Right.
Because you're in a different state, I know that, as I said, part of the GOTV effort in the state of Florida was people were being bombarded by progressive organizations to vote by mail because of how the mail was. Remember the post office, the mail wasn't getting to places on time. A lot of people were encouraged to, I'll tell you what I did. I had a vote by mail envelope and I took it to a drop box and dropped it. And then I tracked it. But the average person, do they know to do that? And I think you might be saying something, but you're on mute.
Oh, looks like we lost her.
Oh. But I'll just wrap with saying like I said, each state is different. The messaging that you're getting, that's interesting that senior citizens were being told something else. I will say some states are better at vote by mail than others. Oregon conducts their entire elections by mail. I have a girlfriend in California who was in one of my talks who I was sharing about Souls to the Polls. She's in California. She's never heard of Souls to the Polls. Sylvia, you're back.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had to get my mother's lunch. I was waiting for the DoorDash people. I'm so sorry. So I didn't hear your question. What was it? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I just made the comment about the trusted voices, as you said, about in the church. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a network with our church, and people they become afraid, and we're doing it with the vaccine now too, and trying to encourage our senior citizens to do things or not to do things. It all comes through the church, and it depends on who is talking to our pastors and our leaders is what matters, what's being filtered down to the rest of us. Well, the rest of the older people. And then there are people like me who work at Carnegie Mellon who try to dispel some of the bad information that's going out there. It's difficult sometimes.
Yes, indeed. And something I said when you went off was how some states vote by mail is the only way to go. Oregon is an example. So
okay, thank you
for that.
Thank you. I'd also like to draw attention to a comment that came in through the chat from Linda Carruthers, who says, here in California, Hispanic is pretty much unacceptable. Chicano is favored by the Mexican background. So just wanted to draw attention to that.
Again, know where you're working. And Mexican background, yes, more so than in Florida. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Our next question, we have time for one or two more. Our next question is, what impacts on our current voting practices do you predict or have you seen regarding the stealing votes accusations of our recent election?
Oh, hot button, stealing votes. once again, countering misinformation. Actually knowing how the process works in your state is something I would encourage. Part of one of my duties in my previous position was visiting supervisor of election offices in the state. We have 67 counties, so that means 67 supervisor of election offices. They're not on a mainframe, old school style. They're not on the internet. Like to even steal ballots that way would be an act. It's impossible. As you can see, the voting machine companies are suing, and because that is just not possible. And so just be an ambassador of truth. Like, how do you counter that? There are people who still are saying stop the steal, so.
Thank you. Our next question, can we talk about Governor Ron DeSantis wanting to avoid ballot harvesting, and is it a real issue in Florida?
Hi, Maria Jose. I recognize that person. Wow, bottom line is it's not a real thing. There are not ballots flooding in that are changing how the vote is swung. There are not, I think the term of voter fraud going on in the state. I think even in this past election, it was determined that a significant amount of quote unquote fraud to swing an election one way or the other. The ballot harvesting is a part of a laundry list that the governor held a press conference on the other day regarding trying to tighten up election laws in the state of Florida. So bottom line, it's not real.
Terrific. And that puts us right at time. So I won't be taking any more questions. But thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon, Dr. Clark. What a fascinating and informative talk. And thank you for taking so many of our questions. I'm really glad we got to have this discussion. And thank you to everyone in attendance for joining us today as well. I'd like to invite you to join us for our next event taking place next Friday, also at noon. We're having a professional journeys discussion with Dr. Rachel Brackney, who is a fellow in our Washington semester program and also the chief of police in Charlottesville, Virginia. I hope to see you again next week, and thank you again for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day and enjoy the weekend. Take care.